Welcome to Big Blend Radio's California Employment Law Podcast featuring San Diego attorney Ward Heinrichs. Welcome, everyone. Today is Administrative Professionals Day. In fact, it's actually a celebration or an observance for the entire week. And so Ward is back on the show. You know, he's a San Diego-based employment attorney talking about are you administratively exempt or not? He's got a great article outlining it's like this test to find out if you're exempt. We're going to find out what do you mean by being exempt. I don't know. I always want to be special. I don't, more than exempt, right? Exclusive. Can I be exclusive instead of exempt? What's going on here, Ward?
Sure,
Welcome
you can.
back.
You are exclusive, Lisa. No doubt about it.
Mhm.
But yeah, they like to use the term exempt. That's just the official terminology for it. What it means is that there are certain employees who are paid a salary who qualify in the duties test as well. So there's two tests. You got to make the minimum salary, and you have to pass what we call the duties test, and that's a litany of different criteria. And
Okay.
if you pass that, then you can work as many hours as the boss wants you to work. You'll have to negotiate how much, probably, and you don't get paid overtime. That's the
But you're going to
main
get it.
thing.
Okay. So this is when you go from almost from wage to proper salary, right? In a way.
If you qualify as an exempt employee, then you can be paid a salary and you will get no overtime.
Yeah, because how many admin professionals, end up, hey, I've got to stay late at the office and get this report done for my boss and, or they prepare everything for the meeting the next day. And, so overtime could rack up pretty quickly if you're in that role, because sometimes admin is like you're up at 4 a.m, maybe dealing with, multiple correspondence as well, because the correspondence side of being an admin professional and then there's like assistants. Would an assistant be put in this category? Like if you're an assistant to, I don't know, Richard Branson, if you're his personal assistant and you're dealing with his hotel rooms, all that kind of stuff.
Well, it depends on what you do. It doesn't matter what title you have. It matters what you do during the week.
Mhm.
And you have to, probably the main thing to keep in mind about this is if you're going to be administratively exempt, then you have to have independent discretion to make decisions of importance.
Ooh,
So it's not just like I have discretion to um, type this or handwrite it, or I have discretion to decide how many, when I'm counting something, whether this thing can, whether this item is part of that count or not. That's not of real importance, so it wouldn't qualify. And so you really have to use your independent judgment to make help you make decisions of importance.
mm,
And if the employer or if the employee doesn't do that regularly, and what does regular mean, but that's really what it is. Then they're not going to be an administrative exempt employee. Now, remember,
mm.
there's a lot of administrative employees. I mean, people who, like you said, help maybe even Richard Branson or help whomever in a company. Maybe they're what we call admin assistants now. If they don't have the discretion, they're not going to be exempt, but they still might be doing administrative work. So
Okay.
not everyone who does administrative work will be exempt.
Okay, that's a good point. And no, they don't have to work for Richard Branson either. But if I was
No.
going to work for someone, I think that would be pretty cool. I'd like to go hang out on his island, you know?
Yes, that the right hand man or woman that he has probably has a lot of discretion because he's just got
Yeah.
of this vast empire and he's always doing stuff. And so he probably says, "Hey, you got to take care of this stuff for me. I really can't think about it.
Yeah.
And he can go as far as saying, well, think about it, tell me what you think, and then I'll make the final decision. And under
Mhm.
that circumstance, you're probably still administratively exempt, assuming you're making the right salary.
Yeah, I
Um,
think you're making that if you're his, right-hand person. And the thing too is, the boss can always go, "Hey, whenever it comes to these kinds of decisions, this is what I'm always going to want." You know what I mean? So people know how to make those judgment calls if it's been already
well, now
set
that's an
up.
interesting point. That's an
Oh
interesting point because
boy.
if they say, "Hey, look, I don't care what your analysis is. Here's the type of decision I want," then I would say that sounds like maybe too much control. They really don't have, they're not really using their independent judgment.
So okay, so if they have two, oh, so then it falls down out of the duty line. Like you go backwards in the test. So this is like a hot and cold. It's like, how far do you go up this
Well,
scale?
then that's the problem with the test. There's so much gray area in this. Like you outline someone who's knows what the boss wants kind of thing, and then that sounds like the boss has not given them any independent judgment.
Okay,
And I'll read to you how this part of the test
cool.
is normally described. Customarily and regularly exercises discretion and independent judgment on matters of significance. So discretion, independent judgment. If the boss is saying, "Here's the kind of decision I want you to make," well, it doesn't sound like much discretion or independent
Mm,
judgment there. Now,
hmm,
that doesn't mean, though, that there aren't discretion, independent judgment on other functions that they perform, and in that one category that you named is just one of the many things that that person does. Still could be exempt, but again, you have to look at
okay.
all the stuff they do. So that's the other part of this test is um, it really takes a detailed analysis. You really have to know what this person is doing, and then
Mm,
decide whether you want to make this person administratively exempt. And like we were talking before we went on the air, um, there are many people who do admin work who don't really meet the test for various reasons,
mm-hmm.
but they're considered exempt by the company. It's just one of those tests
Ooh.
that can be very hard to understand and very hard to apply.
Ooh. So I can see where this could be a problem. Like a company will say, okay, let's rather negotiate like a nice salary, right? Here's a nice salary. Then we don't have to worry about overtime. And that's going to be the thing, isn't it? We don't have to worry about overtime and all those kinds
Right.
of things. And
Employers want to do
and
that. Yes.
then yeah, because then it's like then we can budget. We know what they get every month or and then the employee could go, heck, I'm just, following orders. I'm not actually getting that title. And I would actually make more if I wasn't having this title. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to use the word title because I don't mean entitlement. Let's not get into that. But you know what I mean? The
Yeah.
exempt
Think about
thing.
function. What do they do?
Oh,
Yeah.
good one, good one. So the so like an employee could be, oh, I'm exempt, I'm up here, I'm making decisions, but they're not making decisions. They think they're doing really well, but if they really looked at their hours, they're not making the money that they could be making.
There's an interesting tension there. There are I've talked to many employees over my years doing
Yeah.
employment law, and there are employees who may not really qualify, but they want the salary because it gives them clout, the salary and the whatever title they're given.
And it
And
helps them
so
for resume, right?
even
Yeah.
though even though they may be working 60 hours a week, and that would be a lot of overtime if they weren't exempt, they prefer it. So there's an
Okay.
interesting tension there. But where employers run into problems is if the employee gets terminated, that's the big one, then they may start thinking, well, that wasn't fair. So what can I do to get back at my former
Hmm.
boss? And then they may call up an attorney, and the attorney says, well, what did you do? And they say, well, I did this. Well, when you did that, were you able to make that choice or not? And they go, well, no, they really said this is the kind of choice I want you to make. And so it was real. My my discretion was real narrow. And, most employees won't know the terms, but that's what the lawyer's thinking. And they're listening to how the employee describes their job. And
Yeah.
what the employee, what a lawyer will be looking for is, well, one, did you make enough salary? And now the salary is over $68,000 to be exempt in California, so it's pretty big. And then two, uh, at least for an administrative employee, are they really making independent decisions? And if they're really just, comparing one thing to another, like, again, if it's not a matter of significance, then even though they may be making a decision about it,
Yeah.
then then they don't qualify. So if they're just comparing, the size of this widget to the size of this widget and saying, well, this is the widget we want,
Okay.
probably not.
Ooh. So this is something to look at before you actually sign a contract, employment contract.
Well, yeah, sure you would. And it depends on your situation and whether your
Mm,
employer wants to qualify you as administratively exempt or not. And like I
mm,
said, a lot of employees really like that because it's like a step up. Like you said, it's a good resume
mhm,
builder.
mhm.
It looks good. They have more authority in the company, probably. Doesn't mean that they're exempt or not, though, really. But yeah, so there's
Ooh,
all that goes with it, and then, like I've described, this test is pretty squishy. I mean, I can
yeah.
understand why employers would say, "Oh, this person's an administrative employee, and they make decisions." Ah, yeah, or they may not even go that far. They
They
may say,
chose
"Oh,
what I
they're
was
just
having for
administrative."
lunch today. Yeah.
What's that?
They chose what I was having for lunch today. They
Yeah,
made an important decision.
yeah, that's right. They call up the cafe and say and order whatever,
Yeah.
and they don't even ask what people want. They just order it. So
Yeah,
that's a
that's it.
decision. Oh, but
Yeah.
is it of a significance?
But they know how to get through the soup Nazi, just
Well,
say
maybe
that's
that is
important.
a significant decision then. The
Yeah.
suit
Well,
Nazi.
but you got to think a lot of times, admin professionals, especially on the, an assistant side, will not let people through. Remember, there's always that, back in the day, we say the
Well,
secretary
often
always
a
guarded.
buffer. Yeah.
Oh, they were always that guard, and you had to get past the secretary to get to the boss to
Yep.
make the
Yep.
deal. And it was like, okay, and so at that point, I would say they are on the exempt side because they're
You see, I
already,
wouldn't because the boss
ah,
is saying, "Don't let
oh,
people touch me." And if you think, and I don't think that's probably a decision of
oh,
significance, at least in my mind. I mean, a
yeah.
significant decision would be we're going to go with this line of product, not this one.
Oh, that's a big one. Or
Yeah,
like
I think it would
we're
be.
gonna contract these people instead of that person for like a construction project. We're gonna hire these people
Yeah,
versus,
that would be significant, I think.
yeah.
Now, eh, just to take
Mhm.
it a step further, even if they don't make the final decision, as long as the boss is saying, "Well, what do you think?" and then the boss may be making the final decision, if as long as it's a matter of significance and they're doing a lot of independent judgment, then that still would qualify. So again,
Yeah.
the test just has little nuances to it, and I call it a squishy test because boy, you could really think this person fits into it, and it depends on
Mm.
how much you know about it. And
Oh,
so, people who are running businesses probably don't really know all the subtleties of it, and so they may just say, "Oh, that person's administrative exempt. They're doing an important thing. They're my right hand man," but you don't really
but an
give them that much
employee could all of
discretion.
a sudden turn around and go, boom, I want more money because,
Boom, I want more money. Or what if you fire them for whatever reason, and
oh,
now they're saying, I didn't make real important decisions here. Yeah, I was, holding your hand the whole time. I was
so that
blocking the
almost
people
goes to
from your door.
discrimination. So if it was, ooh, that could go into discrimination on someone
Well, it
too.
could, um,
Ooh, yeah,
but
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean that's not really the subject here. I
I
mean,
know,
of
but
course there could be discrimination. It
because
depends
it's like,
why you
oh, yeah,
fired them.
they promised this and then really to save money and gave me like a fake title, but really didn't let me do my job. So therefore, it was like I'm the token hired person.
Well, okay, if it's
Oh,
token
you know,
hire.
I have to
Well,
go
and
there. Come
well,
on.
okay, so we're getting back to DEI and the Trump orders and all that. Yikes, what a mess we've got right now.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
No, if
really.
you're a token, then I think the Trump DEI stuff says that's a violation. That's a discriminatory thing to have a token person. So yeah,
Ah,
don't open up that can of worms. I don't think. And discrimination has to be based on your characteristics that are
okay.
delineated in the law. So again, if they're picking on you because you're a woman, you're a man, your sexual orientation in California, um, and military background, you can be discriminated on the basis of that. So if you're
Oh,
one of those, yeah, gosh, I don't even know how many categories there are. There's over 20, I think 21 or 22. Um,
yeah.
that would be discrimination for picking on for that reason, but not because you're administratively exempt. No.
Wow. So, okay. So, all right. So there could be, backlash from this, but where are we in federal versus California with this? Because I know California's, so they're going to be more, is it more pro employee? I
It
mean,
is.
I know I
It
almost feel
is,
like that's the dumb
but it's
question of the
subtle.
day. Yeah.
It's
Oh,
more
okay.
subtle than most of the other ones. And I really work with California law, and so I don't look at federal law very often, especially in something like this, because I know California requires, for instance, um, the decision making has to be in a matter of significance, and that's California law, and I'm pretty sure that federal law doesn't say as a matters of significance. It's indicated in different ways. So
Mhm.
the test, they're real close. Put it that way. They're very similar
Okay.
tests. California has ways of protecting the employee a little bit more.
Okay. So this is something for everyone to be aware of and watch it as, maybe you go into a company and they're like, this is a promotion, so you need to be aware of that. And the employer everybody needs to be aware. And then just kind of look at it, you
That's
know.
the best way to run these things, and
Mm,
I really think you need legal counsel on this because it's such a
okay.
crazy test, and then legal counsel, and it's going to take some time because legal counsel, if they don't go down there themselves, which really would suggest, then they have to send someone who they trust a lot to go and talk to these people. What do you do? Talk to the boss. What do you have them do? And
Mhm.
really get to know that, and maybe even watch them work for a little bit,
Okay.
because it's
Wow.
really what do you do is the most important thing. And the reason why I'm talking about this exemption that way is I know that many people are designated as administratively exempt employees and they don't meet the criteria.
Wow. And so it really comes down to, yeah, what do you do? Are you able to make decisions? So that's the main part of the test.
Well, that's a big part of the test. I
That
mean, like I
isn't.
said, salary to me is maybe the bigger part because if you don't meet
Mm-hmm.
the salary test, then it's easy. It's black and white. The
Okay.
other one, well, you make decisions. What do you make decisions on? Can they consider this decision making process a matter of significance? Maybe they could. I mean, so there's way more gray area in applying that, and that's a very
Yeah.
important part of the test, no doubt.
Well, it kind of goes like, we touched on this, before we were recording this, that it's like the independent contractor, the ABC test, because
Oh yeah,
it's
there are
it's kind of like
similarities.
that where it's there that gray area. And when it comes to professionals, this is getting weird too, because so many companies, like a small business, will get people that work remotely and they have like, oh, I can do this for you for X amount or whatever. And then we get into that whole like, are you doing this on a regular basis? Or should you be an employee? And then it gets into, oh, maybe you do it if you're getting like a monthly, this is how much that can get wonky. It could be like they're going from independent contractor into employee land and right through, and you know what I mean? It can get, yeah.
And here's a complication of the test. So I had this one client who was designated as an independent contractor, and was making good money, but they certainly were not an independent contractor. They were an employee, the way the ABC test would define employee.
Mm.
So, but then the next question is, well, even if they're an employee, would they be exempt? And this
Mm.
person was doing basically running the company. And so that becomes a tough thing um, in proving the case. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but if someone's really running the company, and then you're going to have to get in the weeds on that. What is running the company? What do they do? Again, what do they do every day? Are they just on a production line, making sure that bottles are filled to a certain level, something like that?
Yeah.
And that's the main part they do? Well, if that's the main part they do, then probably not exempt.
Mm.
So again, it really there's what do they do is the most important thing.
Yeah. And
And
it
what do
goes
they do
into
the
even
most of?
management, right? This also goes into management. You might be managing a team, right? When you look at that.
Well, all right. So that's a little different
Oh,
because then, in the first part of my article, I talk about what an exempt employee is, and I talked about the three major types. And one is called the executive exemption or
mm,
managerial. So think of managers.
mm,
Um, and if they are in charge of a team of employees and they're making the right amount of money, then they really have a good shot at being exempt. So
okay.
as manager, executive
Hmm.
exemption, not the
Yeah.
administrative exemption. But what you see in defense of these cases is often the opposing counsel will say, "Hey," and I've been on both sides, as you know. "Hey, this person, maybe they were managing independent contractors, so that doesn't count as executive exemption.
Okay.
It's got to be two or more employees at least half your time." And you can see how that test's a little easier to use than
Yeah.
the administrative exemption. But then the next thing counsel says is, yeah, but they're administratively exempt. They made all these important decisions. then you go, oh man, now I got to fight about the administrative exemption, and that's real common. So
Okay.
in the
Yeah.
situation I was talking about, clearly not an independent contractor, but maybe an exempt employee.
Okay. Well, I know because there's admin that have been there for years and bring the newbies in and help them know the ropes and all of that because it could be, you've got a head, you know, secretary of a whole corporation. I said that word, but I'm
Right,
I'm
right,
just
right.
going there.
Yeah.
The head one, that's the head of the boss, but then is also overseeing the ones for all the executives. I mean, if you're an executive and then you have, an admin person for you or for your team, you've still got someone at the head. And then this kind of goes into HR in a weird way, right? So an HR person may be kind of part of that. And
Well, yeah,
oh,
so HR definitely is an administrative function, but the question is, are the people who work in HR administratively exempt? And there's one thing I kind of left out of that I think is
mm,
important for the definition. It's part of the duties test, and I'll just read how it's normally described: office or non-manual work directly related to the employer's management policies or general business operations,
mm,
or those policies and procedures of the employer's customers. So, think of a tax expert or think of an in-house accountant. So
mm,
those are, and what you said, maybe administrative assistant. Those are definitely all things that are general business operations. They're not making the
mhm.
product.
Okay.
And so they're supporting the business in all these important function areas, tax, accounting, et cetera.
Hmm.
Uh, and administrative assistant, as you described.
Yeah.
So you probably meet that, but then you got to go down to, again, maybe the most important part of this is, and it's a more complicated test than we're just talking about. But I think we're talking about the most important parts of the test.
Hmm.
Um, well, do they exercise discretion and independent judgment
Hmm. Okay. That is
on matters of significance? So
okay. Yeah. So if you're an HR professional and you've talked to someone, had these reviews with them, for 6 months and they haven't improved in what they said and what they need to do to keep their job, you may turn around and say, this is the end of the road for you. So, and they could make that decision maybe, or go to the supervisor and say, dude, look at this. They probably don't talk like I am, but hey, boss, dude, this person over here has not been doing this, and my recommendation is to let them go because we also have, the evidence that proves they're actually, a big waste of time and money. That was nice.
Yeah, I think that I think HR directors, if they have that title and they're in charge of the department, HR department, they're probably going to be administratively exempt. But again, you got to be careful with that. You got to look at the duties. So if they say, hey, here's what I see, what do you want to do? Because they haven't made a decision. Now, maybe they're advising them enough to still be shoehorned into an administrative exemption. But it's very different than if they say, hey, you need to terminate this person. Now they clearly have made a decision of significance. And if they do that a lot, the HR director, then they're going to be exempt. If they do less, then you got a gray area. And I have a case going right now where there's an HR, it's not a real big company, HR person made decisions about terminating people, just made them. And so that person is going to be administratively exempt, probably.
Okay. Woo. And I like that this whole test is made up about duty because you got to say duties again. Just
it's always fun to say that word.
I know it is. It's always fun. It's always fun. So, all right. So it looks at minimum wage and what you're supposed to get because this is the whole thing. It goes from minimum wage and jumps in to the
You're
salary.
talking about, all right. So if you've not properly categorized the person as administratively exempt, then what's the downside to that? Well, the downside is maybe they'll sue you, or they'll go to the labor commissioner or whatever it is, and now you got a problem if they don't meet that exemption. It's something you can fight about though, because there's enough squishy in there that as an employer you can say, hey, they really didn't make decisions about matters of importance, significance, or however you want to describe that. So it's one you can fight usually because there's enough squishiness in the test. But if you lose that fight or you don't want to fight, then now they're not exempt and they may be working long hours. Maybe they work a 55-hour week versus the 40-hour week that you have your hourly employees work. And then California says, well, the salary only goes to the first 40 hours of the week. And so anything beyond that is going to be overtime. And it's also going to be a violation of minimum wage because California says they didn't get paid anything for those out. If it's 50-hour week, they didn't get paid anything for that 10 hours, extra hours. And what that does, I mean, of course, you want to make the overtime; it's more, but you have a severe penalty for violating minimum wage, and that's what we call liquidated damages, and that's equal to the amount of minimum wage that you didn't get paid for those hours. Wow. So normally, if you have just to make this as clear as possible, if you have just a minimum wage violation and it's proved, court goes, yes, you're right, then you get the amount of minimum wage you didn't get, whatever it was, you didn't get paid for. And then on top of that, you get the same thing again as a penalty. So you get it twice. The minimum wage you weren't paid for, and then as a penalty, same thing. So it's double. So
man, so you got to be careful.
That becomes a real big problem, and damages could build up quickly. And there's other potential violations. And then you're talking about wage statements aren't accurate.
Oh my
You're talking about maybe meal periods and rest period violations because if you're exempt, you're not entitled to a lunch. But of course, people do. But they might be eating at their desk because hey, I'm exempt. I'm doing things.
Oh, look at me. That's what I'm doing it. So
right.
No,
but you work for yourself, so you have no case against yourself.
No, I don't. But I do get to do what I want. No, anyway. But I wanted to go into: does this ever affect paid vacations when it comes to someone getting like, all right, now you're going to go to the set. I got two questions, and I'm sorry, I better not mess them up. But
Okay.
if you now go, like I would say for an employer, depending right on the circumstances, maybe have someone at the minimum wage level, because what happens if you hire someone and then they start messing up decision making? If their independent ideas and thoughts and decisions suck, right? Then you want to go, hey, you need to go back here. You're good at this, so I'm pulling you backwards, and you need to go to the minimum wage zone because this is actually where you're really good, and maybe they're really good there, but just not good at being decisive. Because some people are brilliant at certain things, and you think, oh, they're really, really good. Let's move them into the decisive part, and then, you wish you didn't. You know what I mean? Because now they're spending. You see what I mean? Like that's kind of a tricky thing. Like maybe you pulled letting them make decisions because they're not good at it. So then you need to demote them, right?
Oh, okay. So I think what you're saying is if you give someone a raise and a promotion, and part of their new job is to make decisions of significance, and they make bad decisions, then you can, demote them. Sure you can.
Okay.
Um, I think they were exempt for the time that they were trying to make. Well, again, were they?
This is
We'd
the
have to go
squishy
through what
stuff.
they actually
Yeah.
did day to day. But assuming that everything else was in line, it sounds like they were just making bad decisions and they still be exempt. But once
Okay.
they got demoted, now it sounds like when you say minimum wage, and boy, that would be a big demotion. But anyway, um, now
Yeah.
they're getting paid hourly, and so there's not a question about whether they're exempt or not.
Okay. So you have to be aware
Generally,
of
at
that.
least on this test, because there are,
Yeah.
there are other exemptions that do allow payment of an hourly wage, but
Okay.
as a general rule, that's not the case. It's usually salary.
Okay. But if someone really doesn't do well in their job in the making those decisions and you start pulling away the decision making, you need to be conscious that now,
I see what you're saying. Okay, rather than
yeah,
demoting them, they still are in the same position, but the position has changed.
yeah. So that could happen where they're just sitting there getting the salary, but they've pulled away the decision making because they suck at it, but they're good at the rest of the stuff. You can't let that situation sit there because you're setting yourself
Well,
up for.
what you need to do is reevaluate, because it's possible that they're still exempt. It could,
Mm,
there. I can't tell you based on what you said whether there are other areas in which they're making decisions of
yeah, it just
significance.
depends on who. Or, yeah,
And
yeah.
so you want to definitely reevaluate that, and you certainly look at that. That would be a key. And you go, hey, look, you
Mm.
you don't let them make any decisions. So yikes, they don't look administratively exempt to me. Maybe you ought to reclassify them and pay them hourly, or
Okay, that's what I'm saying. That you should have those
you
periods of
no, you
that.
need to reevaluate. And the reason why I say reevaluate, because the test is complicated. And so it's not just a snap decision. Really, it should not be, because you might make the wrong decision, then you might be
Okay,
sorry later on.
so okay, when you do hire someone into this role of being exempt, right? You shouldn't you look at getting an attorney and get legal counsel, like you're saying, before you hire them. Like set up your parameters. No.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I 100% agree with that. Now, I think some people hire HR people, HR consultants to
Mhm.
do this. And depending on how broad their knowledge is, maybe they're good at it. It's probably the illegal practice of law, but you never see those cases. So, but you're not wrong in talking to an attorney. That is for sure. And
Okay.
I would not do it myself. Now, maybe you have someone uh, analyze the job duties and get real, follow them around for a
Mhm.
day or whatever it is, and look at the paperwork they do, et cetera, and say and give an opinion about
Mhm.
their job duties, or maybe it's better just to say, just when you analyze it, just list everything and then give
Okay.
it to your attorney. So that may be a good way to cut back on some costs, because someone's going to have to do that. Someone
Yeah.
is. Now, of course, if you have someone on the inside, there's the potential of them being too nice to the boss, and you don't want that. You want to be upfront
Yeah.
and clear about the
Okay.
advice you give, because the downside is horrible. And then what I normally do is I say, hey, here's your risk. I go, and risk varies, it's on a bell curve. Yeah, this person, they really could argue that she's not an independent contract, or excuse me, not administratively exempt. But you can also argue that she is. So if you want to do it, go do it. But I want you to understand that, boy, you could lose this in court. There's really a risk that you could. It's not a huge risk. It's not like I'm saying, oh, clearly not administratively exempt. And so, but that's the kind of opinion you need. You really do when you're doing this. And I know a lot of businesses don't, and they may not suffer consequences if they don't get sued, or don't get a PAGA claim, or don't get a labor commissioner claim. But at some point, usually it catches up to you, honestly.
Yeah, because people are getting, financial, when the world gets a little tight in the wallet, things get a little wonky out there.
Oh, yeah, it does. Absolutely. When the economy goes down, you see more of these types of cases filed. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I wanted to touch on one thing, because we're approaching summer. I mean, right now we're in Florida, you're in San Diego, we're in Sunshine Land, and we all know vacation is coming, right? It's time.
Yep.
When you are exempt, does that affect paid vacations and stuff like that? Or
well, vacation, at least in California, I think it's pretty much the same throughout the country.
Okay.
It is its own policy, and you don't have to give anyone vacation. You're not required to by the law.
Okay.
But if you do give vacation, then there's certain parameters. And the main one is it's considered an earned wage. It's just delayed in the execution of getting that wage. So it's earned. I earned it. That's in my bank. So if I get terminated or I leave, you got to pay me all the earned vacation in my bank. So it's a wage. But
it's
if
like Social Security.
you're free to not have vacation.
Okay.
You're free to not have a vacation policy.
Okay. That's important, because I think that gets everyone's like.
But you're right. No, that would affect the value,
Okay.
What's the value of the vacation? That would be a question that might turn on, well, are they exempt or not?
Well, I'm always wondering how people go on these big sabbaticals. Like, hey, I'm going on a sabbatical for a year. And I'm like, who are you working for? I want to go on a sabbatical. And
Yeah,
Nancy
those are
says
kind of
no.
cool, it looks like to me. I go, wow, 9 months in Europe, or who knows where you go.
I mean, it's like, how do you pull that? Like, what did you write up? What kind of proposal did you do? Like,
well, no, some companies, most companies don't have a sabbatical policy, but some companies do. They say, if you've worked here for 20 years, you're entitled to the sabbatical. We think it's very important. It'll make you a more rounded person, better decision maker.
I think the academias get this more.
I think you're right.
Well, maybe not anymore.
Well, again, that's an internal policy. You don't have to give sabbaticals, but if you do, then, well,
if you say so at the beginning.
That's not an earned wage. It's not like vacation.
Yeah, that's different. Wow.
It'd be contractual, though, possibly. And contracts in employment are kind of weird. An employee handbook, even though it's what I call a roadmap to how you run your business, anything that is potentially promised in there usually isn't an enforceable contract. I've brought this up in front of judges, and judges don't like to call a handbook an enforceable contract, and it's not supposed to be, really. It's supposed to be,
because it's a guidebook.
It's supposed to be a guide. It's supposed to be a
guide, and then things happen.
But you can argue, and I have argued that under certain circumstances, policies and handbooks are a contract,
like
and you
harassment.
can win that. It's possible. It's possible. So anyway, the reason why I went down that road was employee contracts. What's in them, what's not in them. This is clearly one. It's a written thing that you agreed to, and everyone wrote. So, but the reason why I said that was, well, is the sabbatical something in the handbook, or is it something promised in the contract that you will get? Who knows?
Oh, okay. I see another podcast coming on sabbaticals. Who knows? But if you worked in a brewery in San Diego, I don't know if you want to go on a sabbatical. That'd be fun.
Stay why leave? Oh my gosh.
Why leave?
I love my job.
I know. Fill it up and share it. That's a good one. Well, Ward, always fun having you on the show, and happy hump day, everybody, and administrative professionals week. Oh my, trying to get that is a mouthful. Really, it is.
I
Everyone
stumbled
go to,
several times on it.
I know, even with the article, I'm like, I can say this, I can do it, but sorry for saying secretary. I don't know what was wrong with that word, but maybe
It,
it was,
it
oh,
was
I'm going to get in
okay
trouble.
30, 40 years ago, but
It's
now
like you
it's
can't say cockpit
administrative
on an
assistant
airplane
usually.
anymore. You can't say cockpit
Oh,
anymore, and I
and
just
you
did.
can't smoke on an airplane anymore, at least in the United States. Now, do
Oh,
you ever fly on a plane that's been in Europe? Sometimes you can still
yes.
smell. Excuse me, I'm thinking Asia actually. Sometimes you can still smell the smoke because they were
Oh,
allowed to
yeah,
smoke
and
there.
well, when we came here from South Africa, we went from, well, we didn't, it wasn't to here. We flew from Cape Town or Joburg, I can't remember, to Heathrow, and we were in the smoking section of the airplane.
What do you
And
know?
and that was a long flight with a whole bunch of smoke. And the rugby team was on the same plane. And so it was a big party plane going to England.
Ooh, sounds
And
like
I
fun.
looked down as we get landing, and they're like, there was drunk rugby players like lying in the out the aisle.
The aisle.
Yeah, well, this is, this hey, South Africa's like Australia. We partied over there and they partied on a plane. It was hysterical. It was a good time. So anyway, I
Sounds
don't think
good.
that was way back when, and I don't think any of those were allowed. And yeah, be careful if it's again under your company policy. You may not want to be found drunk in the aisle, but passed out.
Yeah, don't don't be drunk in the aisle if it's a company. I mean, if it's a company,
Well, if
there
it
is a company that I have worked for. It's a small business who allows people to drink. They
that's
do.
yeah,
So they have a keg going in the back, so you can just grab a beer.
I think I need to go work for them. That sounds fantastic.
Well, I'll give you the information on the down low.
Okay, and listen, if they are passed out drunk, be careful what you draw on them with a Sharpie. You may get in trouble for it later.
Ooh, yeah, be careful.
This is
Fraught with
getting back into
peril.
the holiday parties. Remember those discussions, I
Hmm.
was like so bored. Like during COVID, we couldn't do our conversations on what happens at Christmas parties and holiday parties, work parties. But anyway,
Legally.
legally, yeah. The word
I went
legally,
to a
some
wedding during COVID, so I think that probably
oh,
violated the law.
we
It's
traveled the
beyond the
country
statute,
during
though. It's
COVID.
beyond the statute of limitations. I'm good.
We got flack for driving the country and still doing our tour during COVID.
Ah,
But we were in parks, you know.
yeah. No, that seems okay.
But people do, and if yeah, there's trail people that put your mask on. It was like we'd see wars of people yelling at each other about wearing masks or not masks in a park. Like we're outside, you can stay away from each other, and people yelling at each other. And I'm like, all right, that's real nice. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Well,
the world is so much better today, right? Who knows what's going on in the world? But Ward, thanks again. Always fun chatting with you. Everyone, best employment attorney San Diego.com. I never stumble on that. That's a good domain name. We've
nice.
always said so. So
Yeah, you've
have a
been good with it.
good rest of your week in sunny San Diego.
Okay, I will. But it's not sunny, but it is San
It's
Diego.
sunny here. I get to say we're in warm sunshine
Well,
finally.
you're in Florida. Yeah.
It's sunny, but you're getting towards the June gloom, but
Yeah,
it's
maybe that's
April.
what's going on. There's a low pressure system. And
Uh,
it'll clear out though. It'll clear out. We'll get sun in a
oh,
couple hours.
all right, there you go. All right, you take care. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio's California Employment Law Podcast with San Diego attorney Ward Heinrichs. Keep up with Ward at bestemploymentattorneysandiego.com or follow him on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also subscribe to Big Blend Radio at bigblendradio.com.